Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about the need to investigate things that happen in the workplace. So throughout a business's life cycle and any given time, there can become a need to investigate something that's going on in the workplace, either from complaints or noticing a safety issue or noticing that something's happening. There's a lot of different circumstances this can come up in, and they're very varied, and they can really be complex or simple depending on kind of the factual situation, and can really give employers a lot of anxiety when they realize they need to look further into something that might be problematic or challenging or a conflict, but definitely something that employers should always be prepared to do. So what are some things, Russell, that employers should consider when they're thinking about investigations or when things might come up that maybe aren't the best that are happening in the workplace?
Yeah, well, as a starting point, reach out to your HR folks or your legal counsel just to determine whether or not you need to go further. The answer may be, you've got this, you've got it covered, you can handle this, you don't need to do much here, there's already a solution in place, so we don't need to dive into a deep investigation on this, or the circumstances have already changed, so water under the bridge at this point. There may be various answers. But I think it's worth thinking through whether you need to dive deeper or not. And even in those circumstances where maybe it feels like the ship has already sailed, maybe there's a reason to go back in and document. We've talked about documentation a million times on here. So maybe there's some value in doing that. But I think it makes sense to work with your team on, including your outside advisors, as to whether any action should be taken. I would say as a general point, where we often see it on the employment side is with respect to claims of discrimination, harassment, hostile work environment, unsafe working conditions, those sorts of things. And I would say, generally speaking, those things should always be taken seriously. And some degree of investigation will need to be done. Now, whether it's interviewing 10 or 12 people, or it's as simple as just talking to the person that made the complaint and observing what's going on. That may be a case-by-case analysis, but definitely something that has to be done, because as we've talked about in here as well, if someone makes a claim of harassment or discrimination and you don't treat it seriously, you can be exposed for retaliation, even if the underlying conduct was not necessarily legally actionable. So it's definitely something you want to be thoughtful about how you approach it.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Russell, about reaching out as well, whether it's getting your HR department involved if you've got a robust internal function or an in-house counsel, or if you need to get external experts involved, whether it be attorneys or HR professionals. I know a lot of times my clients will have a good instinct on something. They'll email me and they'll say, like, I think we're going to do this. Is this what you would recommend? And maybe I'll have a couple tweaks. Maybe they'll be dead on. Sometimes, though, I'll have a client say, we already have this figured out, but we just want to just make sure this is okay. And it's not. So just something to keep in mind. So it's always good to, run it by professionals, run it by people who can maybe see it from a different perspective than when you're in it. I think those are good points as well. And I think you also made a great point as to timing as well. It's just that timing is everything in these types of situations. And of course, you'd always rather be in front of something and on top of it if possible. But sometimes, that's not always possible depending on the circumstances or how things got reported or how they came to light. But it's not always that the ship has sailed. That's another assumption that sometimes I'll see clients make. And they call me months later when a claim's been filed and they say, well, at the time we found out and it had already happened, so we just moved on. And I'm like, well, there could have been things you could do. So, I think those are really good points.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, number one, you don't want something bad to happen. And if someone's making a complaint, if there's some issue that arises, there's a threat of something bad happening. So just for moral, operational, ethical reasons, all those things, you want to be on it and you want to address the problem before it happens anyway, because it's always easier to address things the further upstream you are. And then from just the legal consequence standpoint, better to have it documented, better to have your ducks in a row. If it's going to become something, better to be lined up and ready to face it. if it's that sort of claim, if it's that sort of an issue.
I think it's kind of on size of company. I see this very drastically as well, because when folks have a really robust internal team, it's a little bit easier to say, all right, let's work this through. Let's talk it out. Let's put it through HR. Let's put it through our process. Let's do this. Whereas sometimes smaller organizations, especially people who have a lot on their plate, it's just that much more likely that things might get missed or slip through the cracks, or they may not feel equipped to handle it and not know who to call or what to do. So that's, just something to keep in mind, to be prepared and say, well, who are we going to call? Not Ghostbusters, probably, but it is Halloween time, right? But, make sure you know who you're going to call, how you're going to handle it, and what next steps are, so that when that stressful moment comes and you're not left wondering what to do next.
Yeah, exactly. And tune in next week for when we wear our costumes for OK at Work.
Exactly. Well, thanks, Russell. See you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.